And the worst part about these propositions, there's $9 million, and there'll be each counselor will get $1 million they can spend in their district. And I would call this a slush fund. I call it a re-election campaign fund.
We also have some things going on here in the city of Tulsa. Charley's here to tell us a little bit about what's happening with a tax initiative that's going on. I'm going to have him come up and chat, and then I'll come back up and give you some rundown. You probably already figured out what we're doing with the poster boards and all that. But Charley, why don't you come on up, and we appreciate it. Thank you. And thanks for bringing the paper.
Oh, you bet. Hi, I'm Charley. I haven't had a drink in 42 years. Oh. It's the wrong meeting, isn't it? Yeah, I'm sorry. By the way, I have pledged that I'm not going to go topless in public for an indeterminate amount of time. As just,
Actually, I told my grandson I could make some extra money. I went topless and had a bag that said, pay me $5 and I'll put a shirt on.
No, I'm Charley Biggs. I publish the Tulsa Beacon Newspaper. I also host a radio show. Rhonda's been a guest on that on KCFO AM 970 noon to 1 on Saturdays. And I'm also about to become a grandfather for the second time. And the other grandparents are sitting right over here, the Bergs. Their son Josh married my daughter Sarah, and we have one granddaughter who's a peach. And Rainbow, yeah. And so we have a little boy coming, maybe next week sometime. So that's all I have to say. See ya. Oh. No, let me just say, I hate taxes. I think the government gets enough money. What do you think?
I agree.
Yeah. So we have a vote coming November 12th here in Tulsa, $639 million. And the news media and the people of the city are going to tell you that it's not a tax increase. But if you talk to, remember Ken Yazel, who's an expert on taxation, it is a tax increase because when they started doing this sales tax, it began as a temporary tax because they knew people didn't want to have a permanent tax increase. So this tax will expire, and that means we're voting on a new tax. So they're lying to us, really. It's very deceitful, and it's a lot of money. By the way, Oklahoma, the tax foundation, according to the tax foundation, Oklahoma has the sixth highest sales tax average in the United States. The local sales tax average is the fifth highest. We pay a lot of sales taxes. And also, let me say too, sales tax is the most aggressive tax. If you know what that, you guys probably know what that means, but it has a disproportionate effect on poor people because they spend more percentage of their money on the necessities of life. Nobody talks about this, do they? And you look around with your water bills, electric bills, all this stuff that you had to pay every month. People on fixed income, it's a burden. So there will be three propositions on this November 12th vote. One is for streets and transportation. That's about 70% of the money. We know we need streets. But I tell you this, if you keep voting in stuff, especially by large margins, you don't get any, it doesn't help your accountability. When you say, well, we put this out there, they'll have us, vote in the money, and we'll spend it however we want because I just voted in again. And has anybody in here been inconvenienced by road work in Tulsa? I have to go downtown to the courthouse to pick up legal notices that we publish, and it's always torn up, and years ago there was a debate that said, instead of having 18 projects going around the city, why don't we have 2 or 3 and finish those and then go on to another 2 and 3 instead of having 18 concurrent. Those are made up numbers, but all over the place, because there have been businesses that have gone out of business because of the restriction to their access. Several years ago, we changed our form of government from a commission form of government to a council form of government. We used to have a streets commissioner, and if they were messing around and not fixing a street in front of your house or in front of your business, you could call him, and he was voted on at large. Everybody voted on him, and you could say, hey, and then he also had the administrative authority to go down there and say, hey, we got to straighten this out. So instead, we divided it up into 9 districts, and then every time we have a street proposal, instead of saying, let's go where the traffic count is high and fix that problem, anybody ever gone south on Sheridan between 81st and 91st at 5 o'clock on a weekday? Yeah, it's 2-lane, isn't it? Yeah. And yet you have streets in North Tulsa and some other parts of town where you can go out and play tennis, on the street because there's no traffic. So they had to divide any bond issue, any road work into 9 districts for political reasons, which shouldn't we be doing it for traffic reasons instead of political reasons?
Tell Mayor Charlie, I'm sure he'll take care of it.
Yeah, that's another lecture. The second proposition, public facilities, parks, public safety. And then the third proposition is interesting. It's a rainy day fund. In 2010, I believe it was, we set up a rainy day fund. It was voted in by the people, and it was about $1 million in it. This new proposal would put about $5 million. Carve off part of the sales tax and put it into a rainy day fund. And, it's probably prudent fiscally to have some money set aside in case for a shortfall. But I think statutorily, statewide, you have to do it anyway. And so the question is how much you need in that fund. Because right now, the state of Oklahoma has a rainy day fund. It's about $1 billion. And Governor Stitt, who I like Governor Stitt a lot, but he wants to put $2 billion in there. And I spoke with some legislators, and I said, well, if you have enough to put another $1 billion in there, why don't we pay down debt? And Nathan Dom said, well, why don't we fully fund the retirement funds, with that money instead of just sticking it into a rainy day fund. And the worst part about these propositions, there's $9 million, and there'll be each counselor will get $1 million they can spend in their district. And I would call this a slush fund. I call it a re-election campaign fund, and that's because I'm cynical. But
can I ask a couple of questions just real quick? Because going back to the streets, what happened to fix our streets? What happened to that money? Or didn't we just vote on that one like a couple of years ago?
2013, yeah.
Extending the fix our streets. I mean,
yeah, that was like 918 million. Here's the problem: we have an oversight committee. There's 21 citizens on an oversight committee, and that takes care of it, right? No, and bless the people that are on there, but here's what happens. They meet monthly. Anybody on the committee here? I hope not, because I'm going to be critical. They go in.
I offered, but they didn't call me.
Yeah, they don't call me for anything. But anyway, these people meet, and they sit around the table, and a staff member sits down and gives them a summary, and everything's going great. Oh, okay. And then once a year, they go in front of the city council and say, well, according to the staff, everything's going great. And it's not because they're crooks or anything, but it's just because they don't dig deep into the numbers. They don't have the time or the capability of doing that. So it's kind of like when the mayor says, well, we want to have these public meetings so we can have input to affect the projects. Well, the projects are already set. And this is just political, trying to gin up support for it. Once again, I'm cynical.
Has anybody made any kind of accounting for how much of the last bond issue has been spent, where it's been spent, and how much has not been spent? Because I haven't seen any dams going up anywhere. Didn't we vote for dams last time? And
On the city's website, there's a project list of the 31 projects that were part of the Vision Forever tax increase back in 2016, and it shows the status of them. I took a look at it recently, and the easy ones, like $20 million check payable to Tulsa County for something, or $3 million, $4 million for OSU Tulsa. That stuff's been done. It's just write a check. But I don't believe the low water dam at 31st Street will even be started until 2028.
Okay, so since we haven't finished what we already voted, for, gee, why do we need to, and when does the 2016, 2013, whatever it was, the last bond issue, when does it pay out? When is it done?
Well, that's a good question. Here's a problem, I think. We've abandoned any concept of pay-as-you-go. Right. So we bond out all these projects, and we borrow this money, and it takes us years and years and years to spend it. Even though, because you think about it, spending $913 million, that's a lot of work, especially if you're trying to be honest and get competitive bids. And, another problem with the bidding is that, these guys go in with a low bid, they get the contract, and then I think it's up to 10% they can have a change order, and so it goes that suddenly they're not the low bid. And
well, there's another problem, Charlie. In the state constitution, a city, a county cannot borrow money for more than a year. That is unconstitutional. So what they do to get around it is they float these bond issues and they create boards, authorities, commissions, and trusts which are quasi-governmental entities which have no citizen supervision or accountability, and they're the ones who actually borrow the money. So when you look at your ballot on November 2nd, it will establish a trust to receive the money.
And here's one other problem, too. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if there was a bond issue, maybe the river tax, it got defeated. Ron, you were instrumental with that. And the TV stations would present both sides, the reasons that you vote for it, the reasons to vote against it. Now, there's no coverage of anti-vote.
Even when we fought Vision 2, we had to call and demand equal time.
Right. Because they do not want to, they're in the bag for the city, basically, and the Chamber of Commerce. And
Okay, another thing I will tell you, a couple of years, I haven't done it recently, that's one of my projects, is to go in and analyze the city's budget for this current fiscal year. But I did it a year or two ago. And out of the budget, it's on their website, they don't hide it, approximately, the last time I looked at it, 18% of all the monies that they spend for that year went to debt service. See, so for an entity that's not allowed to borrow money, we pay a lot of interest.
yeah, and what they say is, well, the interest rates are so low, we can't afford not to borrow money. Well, if you were to run your family that way, we'd all be up to our noses in debt. We are anyway, but
Don't the people that sell the bonds make a ton of money off this also to keep repeating it over and over and over again, and they are the ones that actually are running the train?
yeah, that's true of school districts too. I mean, the Broken Arrow a few years ago, we borrowed $300 million in bonds. $300 million.
Half of that tax increase went to the police and fire to hire more police and firemen, and then a tiny bit for street maintenance, to actually have a functioning street maintenance department that actually does maintenance rather than just go and respond to a pothole that has swallowed a car. But they had no crack filling, no overlay, no skimming. The manager of the department, of the 50 people in his department back in 2016, would talk at the outreach meetings that we haven't had a full-time paving crew in years. They just discontinued it because the police and fire budget kept consuming more and more and more of the city budget. So that's why.
Yeah.
If each district gets $1 million, nowadays that's not much money. I mean, they're going to have a bunch of little projects, because if they want to do a road thing, that's usually millions, isn't it?
Oh, well, it's basically if you want new shrubs in front of the recreation center, or this kind of stuff, and they'll piecemeal it out so that everybody that calls the city council and say, hey, I need, we need something new at the park, or we need, they'll say, okay, well, we'll just cut out $50,000 and take care of that. And so they're going to think, well, our council's really doing something for us because they're spending $1 million in the district. But it does have to go to a vote of the council in every project. But I'll be surprised if any of those are not approved, automatically. I mean, it's a slush fund.
I have another question real quick. The slush fund that you're talking, not the slush fund, the rainy day fund.
Yeah.
That's going to be made permanent, isn't that correct? That's
permanent.
a permanent. So you will be voting to make that permanent. It's not going to be temporary any longer. That portion of, is it Proposition 3?
Yeah.
Is a permanent tax. Never goes away. And the next thing I'm going to tell you is when they tell you it won't raise your taxes, it's a lie, because if for no other reason, the population in Tulsa continues to decline. The pie that's owed does not change, but the number of people that are paying it does. And so as long as Tulsa's declining in population, your taxes are going to go up because you're going to have to pay somebody else's part.
Yeah, in 4 years, if this passes, there'll be $20 million in that fund. And they can only spend it if the proposed fiscal year budget is lower than the current fiscal year budget. And the city's great at budget projections, aren't they? I'm being facetious there. I mean, they're always wrong on deals. But anyway, so that could essentially become a slush fund too, because it's not designated for any specific, purposes.
Yeah, it just goes into a general fund for savings, correct?
Yep. Yes, sir.
I've been kind of getting some thoughts on about the local media have really become the propaganda organ of the city government and the chamber. And I used to kind of hear some balance from like KRMG and Fox 23 and some of the other stations, but I turn it on now and it's like it's the press office of the mayor, not a reporter interviewing someone, and it's just like it's a propaganda organ.
Okay,
Why?
I have an answer to that. Journalists are basically lazy, and they don't want to do the digging to find out the facts. So unless there's and part of that's our fault. If we don't have an organized group to present the facts in a cogent manner, they're not gonna. If you're expecting the press to do any investigative reporting, they haven't a clue, and they won't do it. Except for Charlie.
Yeah, well, I have a degree in journalism from OU. Be Texas, by the way. And we were taught in news coverage to be objective, give both sides. There's always two sides, at least two sides to every issue, and that's dead now. That's just dead because, and most TV stations have maybe 5,
Pretty
6.
faces.
Pardon?
Pretty faces.
Yeah, they don't have investigative reporters, and they.
Mom, stop. No.
and the Tulsa World won't. They're in lockstep with the city, and so people are thinking, wow, we're going to spend all this money on roads, and it's not going to cost anything because taxes aren't going to go up, so I'm going to vote for it. And it's a big deceit, and it's great. We need like 1,000 groups like right here for people to stand up and say, we're going to turn back this. You're going to go back to the drawing board. I mean, we'll pay for the streets, but you have to make sure that you do it right. And we want to get rid of all this extra money that we don't need. And we want to, Nebraska, they cut their sales tax this year, and Oklahoma is very prosperous right now. And we should be helping the people that are, have on fixed incomes that are having a hard time making it because, Steve Whitlock of John 3:16 Mission, he said that they did a study and you have to make $17 an hour right now just to bear necessity to live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah.
That oil building that they announced downtown today is going to be for, it said low income, and I think I heard the apartments, I don't know how big they are, renting for $600 a month? Affordable. Well, how big are they going to be? And I don't even know which building it is, but it's 100 years old, they said. It's going to take a year and a half to renovate or something like that.
Well,
The Price family owns it.
if you remember Randy Bright, he's an architect here in Tulsa, and he used to write in our paper, but he got so busy with that he hadn't been able to do that. But he wrote about densification, and basically there is a movement to get people to live in a core of the city in high-rise apartments and do away with single-family housing. That's it, you know. Yeah. So you see scooters all over downtown, and they.
Well, now they're talking about allowing multifamily dwellings into residential. Yeah.
Okay, I've got to go ahead.
Okay.
You know, Rhonda just mentioned something, and I think we need to, I would just encourage everybody to rethink this thing. They are going to allow something for you to use your own property the way you would like to use it. We have to rethink this whole zoning thing is backwards to a free society. If we're not free, if we have to gain permission first, if we have to get the higher ups, seek some permission of superiors, then we're not free, folks.
Okay. Lori, hang on.
How many of you have seen the movie Dr. Zhivago? Okay, you've seen it. It's like, 5,000 years long, but it takes forever to watch. But there's a scene in Zhivago that it just struck me the first time as I saw it as a kid. The Russian Revolution has happened. Zhivago's been out with the army, and he finally makes it back to Moscow to his home. Beautiful, opulent, wealthy family, gorgeous home, several stories. They at one point had servants and everything. He comes home, and you remember what had happened to his home? The block captain, the comrades have taken over, and the block captain comes through and says only so many square meters allowed per person. And then Zhivago's home for a few days, and block captain comes in and says, we've readjusted it. We're moving 20 more people in because we've readjusted, we've downsized how much square footage or square meters you can have. And it seemed preposterous to think about, but ladies, tell me if you've ever watched HGTV. Anybody? HGTV? Ever see a show called Tiny Homes or Tiny House? As soon as I saw that show, I thought, oh my gosh, it's the same thing. They're brainwashing us from isn't it popular and a cool trend to live in a tiny space? And you have families of 4 living in 600 square foot tiny houses, and they're applauding this. And call it a pinko commie plot. I don't know. But Dr. Zhivago and HGTV, marry up.
In the UK, if you're an elderly family, a couple, and you have a larger house that you've owned for years, the UK is now telling you have to take in so many immigrants or whatever into your house, whether you want them.
Well, you remember Dr. Zhivago when he's confronted with this situation of all these people who've moved in, he goes, well, that's much fairer.
Oh, yeah. He had to toe the party line or else it's off with his head.
Charlie, I have a question. On one of his numerous trips to New York City, our mayor came back with he has signed us up to be a resilient city. I've seen little glimpses of that word used occasionally with other things, but I never did know what a resilient city actually was, except it sure sounds like a left-wing New York City, Bloomberg-style anthill project of some sort. What do you know about it that you can tell us?
Well, nothing, but I do know that they've been searching for dead bodies in a cemetery, and they can't find anything.
Yeah, but it's because of the traffic. They can't dig under the highway now, I see.
Yeah, let's
and
dig up
so
the
that'll
highway.
remain a surefire place where bodies are buried.
Yep.
Well, they're changing that narrative too. Instead of the race riot, now it's is it massacre?
Yeah.
Yeah, he who controls the language controls the day. It was terrible. It was awful, awful. But it is.
Did you go 12
I called.
killed first?
They never talk about that.
If you want to get a nice argument, couple of times after watching 10 o'clock news, it's been a few weeks ago now, or maybe a month or two even, but a couple of times I called Channel 23 News because of their lopsided reporting, and that's Fox News. As soon as I expressed my opinion, there was some woman answered the phone down there. Now, this was at 10 o'clock, after, that period of time. I got the doggonest bunch of left-wing argument I've had in a long time, real quick. So if you want to have a nice argument, get your blood pressure up and everything, and keep your blood flowing, and keep you awake at night, well, call them up and complain sometime.
I can better that one. Call Langford's Washington office and get Amy on the phone. If you want a left-wing argument, just call Senator Langford's office. That's
There's
really
plenty of it to go around. One more question, and we'll let Charlie have a seat. Let Charlie finish. Yeah, Charlie, finish up.
I was raised in New York City, and we were living in a place called Howard Beach, and it was 5 houses and swamps basically in back of us, and a gas station up the road to Cross Bay Boulevard. And they finally got these creosote poles they were nailing into the swamp, and then they eventually solidified the swamp, and then they put the projects up. And I think it loses an identity to have people in the little cubby holes like that. Well, that's where race riots started, and the Italians in that area fought the blacks. And I think it's just breeding for horrible degradation of people to have them live in nothing but if you live in a house, you know how nice it is. You have to live in that little high riser in the sky. To me, it's disgusting.
Well, the city of Tulsa subsidizes housing in downtown. That's it. I mean, they've never stopped by my house and said, we'd like to help you with your house payment, but they do downtown. Anyway, thank you.
Charlie, thank you for your time. Let's give him a hand. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.